Testing, testing.
Press to make press.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Woking Borough Council's Executive. I'm Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the council and executive member for housing, partnerships and planning and the local plan, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting. There's a few housekeeping rules I have to read out before we begin. There are no fire drills planned this evening, so if the fire alarm does sound, please take it seriously and leave the building via the nearest exit. And if you could gather at muster point 2, which is located in the car park at the rear of the building, that would be really helpful. Please ensure that any mobile devices or mobile phones are switched off. And if you're participating via Teams, which I know Rod is this evening, could you, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Please note that the meeting is being webcast live. Now, I just want to introduce members of the public here to this cast of people before you, which may seem rather large. At the back row, that's not necessarily the appropriate place for them to be because they are absolutely vital to the organisation, are our officers. And I'll start over here on my left, your right. That's Matt Pope, just putting his glasses on, who is the director, executive director for adults, children's and public health. And then we've got George Frambolico, who's the director for place and growth. And over here, the person responsible for all the organisation of our committees, including this one, that's Priya Patel, who's the head of Democratic Services. And then next to Priya is Susan Parsonage, who's the chief executive of the council. Next to Susan is Andrew Moulton, who is the assistant director for governance and the monitoring officer. And next to Andrew is Graham Ebers, yes, who is not only the deputy chief executive, he's also the chief finance officer of the council. So I'm going to ask my colleagues on the executive, who are the elected members in the room this evening, to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Mark.
Good evening, I'm Mark Ashwell and I'm Executive Member for Economic Development, Sport, Leisure and the Arts.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Martin Alder. I'm the Executive for Active Travel, Transport and Highways.
Thank you, Martin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Deputy Leader. Oh.
No, you're on. It's okay.
Am I on?
Mine
Yes.
can stay on.
Okay. One was flashing.
Well, you've turned it off, I think.
No.
That's it.
Yes, right. Okay. I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Deputy Leader and the Lead Member for Children's Services.
I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay and I'm the Executive Member for Finance and Governance.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Bishop-Firth. I'm the Executive Member for Resident Services, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty.
Good evening, I'm David Hare. I'm the Executive Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing.
And we have one apology this evening, and that's from Jordan Montgomery, who's the Executive Member for Environment and Climate Emergency. I don't think there are any other apologies because that is the whole of the executive accounted for. So if we can go on to item 51, minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy that I sign those as a true record? Yes. Can we just indicate that we are? Thank you. I'll just sign those now. Okay, we now move on to declarations of interest. That's item 52. Are there any declarations of interest? I think I probably do need to personally declare what I think is a fairly tangential interest, and that's I'm a non-executive director of Woking Borough Council Holdings, which will be referred to in item 65 of the agenda in the shareholders' report. Prue?
I have exactly the same interest in item 65. It's a tangential interest and doesn't preclude me from discussing it.
And David?
And I have an interest in item 65. I'm a non-executive director of Optalis.
Okay. I don't think any of these interests constitute so material an interest that we need to exclude ourselves from the discussion and voting. I think that's, you're happy with that, Imogen. Thank you. Right, so we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a statement from me. This is something we have as a standard item on the agenda, that there is a statement from the leader on any matter of note that the executive and the wider public needs to know about. And I want to share the good news that the council is on course to submit the new local plan to the inspectorate for examination by the middle of February. This will be a month ahead of the extended deadline to comply with the government's transitional arrangements. By complying with the timetable, we are able to proceed on the current housing allocation of 748 new dwellings a year, rather than the new allocation announced in December of 1,336 new dwellings a year. Proceeding with the local plan that Council approved in September will be infinitely preferable to having to start work immediately on a completely new local plan that will be required to meet the higher housing allocation. Starting afresh would mean that all the hard work by our officers over many years would be wasted, and there would be a long delay before the borough had a new local plan able to provide us with security against inappropriate speculative development. That's the great strength of a local plan. It shows that you've considered where to put the housing you're required to provide, and it means you're in a better position to fend off inappropriate speculative developments. By going forward with the plan approved by Council in September, we will be able to secure that protection much more quickly. The Council, I need to explain, has not been able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply since February 2022, 3 months before the current administration was formed. The sooner the new local plan is adopted, the sooner we regain our 5-year land supply. We will then be in a stronger position to reject planning applications contrary to our local policies. Progress of the new plan to the inspectorates, therefore, in everyone's interests. I understand why some residents living near Hall Farm hope that if the new local plan is not adopted, they will be spared new development in their vicinity. But if we had to go straight to working on a replacement local plan with the higher numbers, Hall Farm and the other proposed major development sites would still have to be included to meet the much more stretching target. Hall Farm, to remind everyone, was put into the local plan processed by the previous administration. It has been earmarked for development effectively since November 2021. After exhaustive technical appraisals, the current administration concluded that Hall Farm was indeed the most suitable of the possible major sites proposed to the council by landowners. In terms of compliance with planning policies, local and national, and deliverability within the planned period, it was demonstrably better than the other possible options. We followed the technical evidence, the only sound basis on which to form a local plan that will pass the test of the inspector's examination, and that's quite a rigorous test. Our Conservative predecessors had done the same when they drew up their draft plan with Hall Farm as its major development location. They also had followed the evidence. We have, however, improved on the scheme we inherited. In negotiations with the principal landowner, the number of new dwellings at Hall Farm has been reduced by more than 500, but the vital infrastructure is still agreed, including flood protection measures, new schools, 40% affordable housing, eco-friendly homes, community facilities, highway improvements, public transport and active travel opportunities, and a new country park. So that's the end of my statement, and I hope that clarifies the position with where we are with the local plan, on course, for submission for the inspector's examination in the middle of next month, which is good news, I think, for everyone in the borough. It will be very good when we have a local plan in place. Right, now we're going to move on to questions. And the first question is from Rod Needs. It's good to see you, Rod. Thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, Rod, and I think we all can. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'd like to just say a few words about Paul Fishwick first. I really miss him. We used to have some really good adult conversations together, and I will really miss seeing him trundle along to meetings on his bike. I will now ask my question. In June of 2026, in June of 2024, I asked how many crossings were outstanding, and back came the answer of 24. So how many now have been approved, and what is the size of the list now?
Just before Martin answers that, thank you very much for those kind words about Paul. We miss him also, so thank you. So, Martin.
Rod, thanks very much for your question, and I will try to answer as well as Paul, my predecessor, did. The Highways team have received 60 requests for pedestrian crossing facilities from customers across the borough between January and the end of October 2024. Of these, 49 have been received since June 2024. Requests have been made for 21 individual roads out of this overall 60. To update on delivery, 4 crossings are in the process of being designed for delivery during 2025. There are currently 4 further sites being investigated in detail, and once this investigation is completed, a prioritisation exercise will be undertaken to identify which sites will move forward to be designed for delivery during the 2025-2026 financial year. I appreciate that you have asked me not to refer to funding. However, it cannot be ignored that each new pedestrian crossing can cost between £60,000 and £120,000, and that the Council has a finite amount of funding available. The Council do not have the funding available to deliver all the crossings that are requested. To do this would require in excess of £2 million, so it is imperative that we ensure that the funding we do have is directed to those locations where there will be the greatest benefit. The delivery of any new pedestrian crossing will always be subject to funding being available. Regarding the use of solar power, measures to achieve best value are always considered in the design of highway schemes and are a viable option when visibility and durability standards are met. Generally, the solar power is considered where infrastructure costs are prohibitive. For example, where there is no existing power supply. This is where cost savings are made in terms of installation, as the upfront cost for solar power is higher, but the ongoing costs are lower. A decision on whether to use solar power is therefore made on a site-by-site basis. I hope that helps you, Rod.
Thank you very much, Martin. Rod, do you have a supplementary question you wish to ask?
I did have, yes, but Martin has just answered it regarding solar power, but there was 2 other bits and pieces. Are we working on a standard package that would fit, say, 80% of the requirements? And the second part of it was, what about resident participation? I know there was a big hoo-ha and all that about jumping the queue and all that, but we know we're short of money. Perhaps, you know, residents of certain areas would like to put their hands in their pockets and secure one of these crossings because it's for the benefit of their children.
Thank you, Rod. I'll turn to Martin to see whether he can respond to that.
My response, really, Rod, I wouldn't like to shoot from the hip, which is my standard phrase. I will look into your suggestions with the officers and give you some feedback in a written letter, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, Martin. You know, you're the new man on the block, so I accept that.
Thank you very much for your giving me the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, as a new man, but that's much appreciated.
Thanks very much, Rod. Good to see you.
That's all right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So we've got the next question now, and it's from Becky Staliaros. Becky, would you like to come up? And when you're ready, when you're... Yes, you'll be seen, don't worry. The camera will turn straight to you when you start speaking. But don't forget to... Oh, you've pressed the button, that's
I'm
great.
pressed, I'm bright red.
Great.
Good to go.
So
good evening, everyone. My name is Becky Steliaros. I spent the first 12 years of my professional career as a public servant, so I have felt the sharp end of dealing with crises. I've also seen what happens when policy isn't implemented without a full impact model. It's unintended consequences that I've come to talk about tonight, and we will keep talking about them because adding parking charges at Cantley sounds like a quick win. But for the archery club, and I'm sure for all the other sports clubs there, it will be utterly devastating. Membership, and remember this includes payments that we already make to the council for use of the land, will become at least 3 times more expensive than clubs within a few miles. This will lead to us hemorrhaging members and wiping out our ability to recruit new archers. And day parking charges will render our fundraising tournaments unviable, will be priced out of the market. Today, though, let's focus on unintended consequences brought about by natural strength norms, human biology. I use female sports to illustrate the wider point. Nationally, we know women get involved in much less sport than men, resulting in poorer physical and mental health. Why is that? Well, it's simple to say, but it's complicated to fix, otherwise we would have done it by now. Teenage girls, it starts with teenage girls where they feel more harshly judged. Adult women often shoulder more caring responsibilities, giving them less time and the inclination to engage in sport. And in many sports, it's difficult to find specific equipment that fits the female form. Just ask all of these ladies behind me here. We also know that women not only face more barriers, but they're more susceptible to new ones. But it's not all doom and gloom. In the archery club, we've had great success, actually. Over the past few years, we've gone from 3 of us, to now being 30% female. We're seeing increasing numbers of beginners, improvers, and we've got a few advanced female archers as well. Our head coach is female. We're home to the Berkshire Compound Bow Ladies Champion. She's from Twyford. We're home to several other highly ranked female shooting in the Olympic-style bow category. They come from right the way across the borough. Between us, we hold over 30 county records and a couple of national ones as well. And we've also successfully supported teenage girls, whether they're motivated by fun or by medals. Over the past 5 years, 4 of our juniors have become national champions or members of the British squad. 3 of those 4 were girls. They're now fully grown women. And all but 1, who badly injured her shoulder, are still shooting. They've kept in the sport. And it's not just girls. Come to any practice session and you'll see mums lined up right beside their teenagers. Our safety rules mean a parent has to stay with their under 18. And so mums think, well, I'm here, I might as well give it a go. And then they find it's fun. And they find it's a good way to get their daily steps in. And for some, it reignites their competitive edge. That's down to the culture we've built, the time flexibility that Cantley gives us. And because the car park is close, that means that if you've got a less strong body, it's no barrier to getting your heavy kit down onto the range. But we know that adding barriers can easily undo all of this success. Advanced competition kit like my kit, weighs around 30 kilograms. That's more than half of my body weight. Whereas for the equivalent male archer, it's probably closer to a third, and then that's accentuated by upper body strength, advantages that are inherent to the male form. So some of my male counterparts could possibly choose to park in the surrounding housing estates for free, whereas I can't, not unless I want to injure myself. It's human biology that no amount of willpower or strength training, trust me, I've tried, will overcome. So with the inevitable knock-on of parking charges, meaning that physical strength will correlate with the ability to park off-site for free, how will the council integrate its own equality strategy with the differential impact on participants in equipment-intensive sports? Thank you, Councillor Alder.
thank you very much for that question. Yeah, it's slightly different from the question in the agenda, but essentially you're interested in the potential for inequity and the importance of a full impact analysis.
Right. So the answer we prepared for your original question, which is the only one really I can deliver without, if you want to hear something tonight. Basically, Wokingham Borough is amongst the lowest funded unitary council in the country and is currently facing unprecedented financial challenges, such as the rising demand for adult social care and special educational needs. In the light of these pressures, the Council is unable to continue to provide the extensive facilities at Cantley Park without asking those that use them to contribute to their upkeep. Consequently, the Council is proposing to introduce parking charges similar to those currently in use at our other leisure sites like Dinton Pastures and California Country Park. This will mean that visitors using the facilities at Cantley Park will need to pay a parking charge during the week and at the weekends between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. As part of the process of implementing this change, we will be amending the borough-wide off-street parking traffic regulation order, TRO, to include the car parks at Cantley Park. The Council will be required to undertake an equalities impact assessment at this stage to establish whether anyone with this protected characteristic would be adversely affected by the proposal. The Council would then need to include mitigating actions should any adverse impacts be identified. There will also be an opportunity for residents and users of the park to comment on the detailed proposal when we undertake the statutory public consultation that is required before we can make an amendment to this TRO. Does that help with your question?
Do you want to ask a supplementary, Becky?
I do. I've been asked a direct question, though. Democratic Services tell me I can't speak other than to ask my question. Can I reply, or is my reply counted as my supplementary?
Well, I think we're very happy for you to give us any written statements you want to add, and we will welcome some evidence that you would like to present to us. But I think probably you need to just ask a question as the supplementary, if you can.
Very well. So, Councillor Alder, I'm going to say some quite strong things, and I appreciate very much that you've recently taken on this brief, and I also appreciate the sad circumstances in which that transfer happened. So any comments I make are directed very much at the process, rather than anyone in particular. And quite frankly, I am amazed that the sports clubs and the theatre that are based at Cantley have been so appallingly treated. We have excellent relationships, excellent professional relationships with the officers in this council that operate the sports pitches, and yet we heard about the parking plans through the paper. That's the same answer that you gave at the full council meeting last week to my colleague Dan.
Yep.
So I will replace the supplementary question I was going to ask you, and I will ask you whether you have any awareness of the thousands and thousands of pounds that the clubs that operate at Cantley put into the area itself for upkeep, for mowing. And I would ask why, given those thousands and thousands of pounds, this club members' money goes into the infrastructure directly of the archery facilities there. So I feel quite insulted that you would say that facility users have to pay for upkeep without zero acknowledgement of the money that's already going in there. And yet we're to be treated apparently the same as general members of the public. So the question is, are you aware of the funding that already goes in, and will that be accounted for when you're working out your strategy for how to deal with different groups?
I think the best thing I would say, because it's a decision to be made by the council, is that we'll give you the written reply to this question. It would be foolish of me to make a commitment now which I couldn't deliver on.
Yeah. I think it is worth saying that we are still in the process of working through a lot of things in relation to this. It's not a decision that's been made. That's important. So your input will be very valuable, and we would welcome your assessment, both of the equalities impact, but also on the point you're raising about the contribution you're already making. Thank you. Right. I think that brings to an end public questions. I don't think there are any councillor questions that I'm aware of. No, there are no councillor questions. You're very welcome to stay if you want to listen to the rest of the agenda, but it will be an act of amazing public spiritedness if you do. But we would like to continue to engage with you, so will you please send us the information you've got and you want to share with us?
Thank you.
Okay.
Professional skills as an impact officer might come in handy there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, colleagues, I'm going to change the order of the agenda now because Mark Brunel Walker, who is the Deputy Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee and chaired the committee at its last meeting when it considered item 60, which is Woking Borough Council future office provision. Mark was chairing the meeting then, and he's come to, at our invitation, he's here to take us through the recommendations of his committee, which you should see summarised in the supplementary agenda that has been prepared. That provides a note from the minutes. I don't know whether you've got a copy of that in front of you, Mark. And when you're ready, Mark, of course, you need to press the little red button.
Thank you, and my apologies for my late arrival. Unfortunately, some train challenges at Paddington this evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Executive for the invitation to be extended to me to attend this evening. I think it's a measure of what's a successful relationship and fulfilling the role of overview and scrutiny, in that it is not there as an adversarial or combative facility, but the role of overview and scrutiny is really as a critical friend of the Executive, and to actually provide input and to help shape sort of better policy making, better decision making, and to give a wider range of views on some of those topics that are coming up. The committee had an excellent presentation and an extensive amount of paperwork on the proposed headquarter relocation programme. And in our lengthy discussions with Sarah Morgan present, and I should again pass on my thanks to the excellent work that she did in producing the summary and the report and all of the updates that she gave to Management Committee and in answering our questions. And in doing so, the committee has asked me to make some suggested recommendations to the Executive in your deliberations this evening. And I'd just like to take a few minutes to just go through them. They're all laid out on page 5 of the pack that you should have had this evening and attached in there. But essentially, we noted all of the extensive findings and outcomes from the latest stage of the feasibility work. And the following recommendations that we felt more appropriate to be considered, and I hope that you'll take those into your deliberations this evening, that we looked at all of the options in the paperwork. Part of that was that the following headquarter options be retained for further consideration. And there are lots of factors that came into play of that, part of which is the local government reorganisation that's affecting lots of the UK and the uncertainty that brings us because we don't know when or where Berkshire will be on that list. So our view was that the full refurbishment of Chute End, relocation to sort of 28 to 38 Peach Street be retained. And where we also offered an alternate option was that the leasehold and freehold acquisition should also be kept on the list for items for consideration, because with the benefit of extra time that the reorganisation may bring, that situation might change in some of the deliberations and thinkings of officers as they're approaching it, and to your good selves as you're deliberating on that, and that it would be perhaps not prudent to remove those when perhaps some of the circumstances are changing on the deliberations that you're having. The key thing that we really discussed is that there are some Woking Borough Council owned assets that are not considered suitable for further consideration for the headquarters. I think specifically the answers that we came up with were Rubra 1 and 2, for example, and that they can be released and appraised separately for their long-term use. I think we also went to great lengths to make sure that when we were saying those sort of comments, that anyone listening to this didn't automatically assume that those would be immediately disposed of or put for sale signs up tomorrow. But we thought that that view would give more definite approach for officers to be able to consider those as part of the wider remit. And that thirdly, we recommend that a cross-party working group be established. to consider the detailed analysis of the remaining headquarters options, including sort of the cost benefit, the risk and the deliverability. And part of the reasoning just behind that third point is, again, because of the impact of time and the change and some of the other factors coming into play, the management committee was really grateful for the detailed consideration that had been given, that all of the work provided to the management committee in that, and that with the benefit of time, and that a number of those options will likely change over the course of time, that would just give more input, more say, more visibility into what's going on, and also enable people to provide options and input. There's a wide range of skills and experience in non-executive members from all parts of the council, and hence why we suggest a cross-party working group be established. Those are the main recommendations that we wanted to put forward to the executive in your deliberations this evening. I'm happy to take any questions or points that you have on them or clarify anything.
Thank you very much, Mark. You've really presented that very thoroughly and very clearly, and I'm grateful for the way you chaired that meeting. It was, I think, a very constructive meeting, which ended up with some recommendations that I personally don't think we're going to find too difficult to accommodate. I think it's worth just reminding everyone that our starting point really with this report was to be in a position where we weren't making a decision as such. We were trying to work out what we could rule out and therefore free up for other potential use. And that was the primary objective. And I think your committee approached it in that spirit, and I think has helped us reappraise the process and work out what the best way forward is. So I very much welcome this positive engagement between overview and scrutiny in the executive. I think it's a model we want to follow more often. And it's possible because we're bringing reports to ONS committees before a decision is made by executive, rather than in the way it used to be done, which was a kind of more combative approach where executive made the decision, it was called in, and then necessarily the battle lines were drawn, the trenches were dug, and it became much more difficult to secure some kind of agreement as to the way forward. I think there's a couple of colleagues who want to say something on this, and then I'm going to suggest a way in which we might accommodate much of what you've suggested within our recommended course of action. So I'm going to go to Mark first and then Imogen.
Yeah, I haven't really got a question for you, Mark, but I've just got to say it was very refreshing to see overview and scrutiny working together to improve outcomes. And I've seen those outcomes. It's just a fantastic example. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mark.
I'm grateful for the comment. I'll feed that back to the committee at the next meeting, but it is the model of how it should work. It's not a combative environment. It should be constructive and supportive, but also as a critical friend. And that early development and the early engagement of scrutiny is the model of how, the overview and scrutiny of how it should work.
Yeah. Imogen, you wanted to say something also, I think.
Indeed, I would echo what Marcus had said as well. It was a good meeting. I watched it online. It was interesting to watch. I think that what we need to make clear is that, from what I can understand, that there isn't a do-nothing option. We have to do something. And as I understand it, we own this building, we own the Peach Street building, both of which, to go anywhere, would require us to spend money. And is that correct? Yes.
Yes, I think the other point that the committee, and perhaps it hasn't come out in the kind of the summation notes that are here, we have a duty of care to our residents in the way that we spend residents' money. But we also have a duty of care to all of the excellent officers that work from here as well, and that this building and its age has a significant sort of maintenance requirement, as any building of this age would require. And so, it is about the sensible use of funds in the right way for the right activity, and to bring this building to a standard without sort of spending more money than is needed to be done, or wasting money on unnecessariness. But it was to provide certainty to our officers, and also to ensure that, whilst it's not a decision to move forward in terms of what we're going to do, which I think is a really important part of this, it was a decision on the things of what we're not going to do, which also provides certainty and a clear direction to the excellent officer team that are putting all of this work together.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Prue, you wanted to say something?
Yes, it triggered something in my mind when you were saying that, which I sort of hadn't flagged up before. What is important about this is this has been worked on for about 2 years, something like that, and we've come to the decision about what we're not going to do to free up the other things, right at the point where the new incoming government has started on their local government review. And I think I think it's important for us to make clear to the public is that we have no intention of making any long-term decisions. Well, that's all up in the air. So we're not going to be progressing multi-million-pound things at all until we know what the future of this is going to be. It's a very unsettling time for everybody. It's an unsettling time for councillors, but it's an unsettling time for our officers who are working here. Their jobs depend on what we're doing. And the public want to know that we're spending their money wisely. So we will not be spending shed loads of money on a new headquarters when we don't even know whether we will exist in 10 years' time. So we hope we will, but this is really about releasing those assets so they can be used for something else that's useful to the council and the public.
Okay, well, just a few comments, and then I'm going to suggest a form of words which I'd like to share with Mark so that he can be comfortable they do incorporate the fundamental points that are being raised by the committee. The first point is to echo Mark's thanks to Sarah Morgan and all of the officers who have been involved in what has been incredibly detailed and painstaking work to make appraisals of the different options. And I think we should record our thanks to them for that. Secondly, to really reiterate the point that Prue has just raised, it is appropriate, I think, to have a pause in the process while we wait for greater clarity to emerge on the direction of travel so far as local government reorganisation is concerned. That remains very uncertain, and when we've got greater clarity, we can then start moving forward again. But until we have that clarity, it would be unwise to devote lots of time and effort to this. And the third point really relates to your final recommendation about this cross-party working group. I have said in the council chamber many times that I want to call on the expertise and knowledge and experience of councillors of all parties, and this will be an opportunity to do that. So what I'm going to suggest is that first, on page 301 are the existing recommendations to the executive, and I just want to take you through some suggested changes to those. The first recommendation, you'll be pleased to know, remains absolutely intact. It's unaffected. The second one is going to have a few words added and a few words taken out. So if I can read you my version of the new recommendation 2. Agree that having further explored options, the options of a full refurbishment of the existing Shoot End offices or a relocation to 28 to 38 Peach Street, Wokingham, or the leasehold or freehold of a building are the current viable options for future headquarters. Does everybody understand that wording and feel comfortable with it? Good. So and I will be able to pass all these to you afterwards, Priya, just to save you having to try and take it all down. The third recommendation would be changed to be more explicit. So agree that Rubra 1 and 2 and the former Wokingham Library are considered not suitable and therefore are no longer required for future office provision and are released from consideration under the headquarters project, and officers will appraise plans for their long-term use. So that's, as Mark said, it's not saying these are immediately going to be sold or repurposed tomorrow. It's saying that they will be released from consideration for this headquarters project, which will enable us then to consider what the most appropriate long-term use is of those buildings. You comfortable with that? And is everybody else? Good. And then the final one, which is the fourth recommendation, somewhat changed again. And what I'm going to suggest is that it now reads, note that the timing for the next stage of work will be influenced by receipt of further clarity. Further clarity might be a slightly generous term. We haven't got any clarity at all at the moment. Further clarity on the implications and timescales of any local government reorganisation. Once substantive work resumes on the headquarters project, a cross-party working group will be established to support the process of determining the best option. And the logic there is there's little point in setting up a working group that won't do anything for potentially quite some time. So I think we would set up that cross-party working group once the pause ends and we feel we're in the position to move forward. So are you comfortable that that incorporates the essence of what you were asking for in your recommendations?
Very much so. I think that's an excellent amendment to the current proposal as it stands. So I'm grateful for that, and I fully echo the idea of not having. It's almost pointless to have a working group set up to meet now when there's really nothing to discuss. And I do hope at some point, for everyone's sake, including our officers, to give them some certainty that we get some future clarity on the direction of local government reorganisation as it may impact or on its potential impacts of Berkshire. So I think when we have that clarity and certainty, or just a better sense of direction, it enables us to move forward. So I'm grateful for the amendments to the existing proposals. I think that encapsulates very much the spirit and the feedback that Scrutiny wants to provide, and I'm grateful that that's been listened to and taken into account for the revised recommendation. So thank you. I'll take that back to the Management Committee.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. Unless anyone's got anything further to say, I propose that I just read out again the suggested or now the new recommendation, and then ask everyone to vote on this. So the first recommendation is that we consider the findings and outcomes of the latest stage of feasibility work undertaken on the Council future office provision, including the financial impact. Second, that we agree that having further explored options, the options of a full refurbishment of the existing Shoot End offices or a relocation to 2838 Peach Street, Wokingham, or the leasehold or freehold of a building are the current viable options for the future headquarters. And 3, agree that Rubra 1 and 2 and the former Wokingham Library are considered not suitable and therefore are no longer required for future office provision and are released from consideration under the headquarters project, and officers appraise plans for their long-term use. And then the final recommendation will now read, note that the timing of the next stage of work will be influenced by receipt of further clarity on the implications and timescales of any local government reorganisation. Once substantive work resumes on the headquarters project, a cross-party working group will be established to support the process of determining the best option. So can I ask for all of those in favour of those recommendations to please show? And that's everyone. Excellent, thank you. And thank you again, Mark, for coming along this evening. An heroic effort, given the challenges at Paddington, which I know only too well. But thank you very much. It's really helpful. And as Mark said, it's been very, very pleasing to see how well Overview and Scrutiny can work with the executive when there's a will to do so. So thank you. Excellent. So we've now dealt with item 60 on our agenda. You're very free to go. I certainly wouldn't recommend staying unless you really want to. So we're going to revert to our proper order, and that's go back to item 56, which is the local transport plan. This is on page 13 of your agenda. And then this will be Martin's first opportunity to present a paper at executive. So it's over to you, Martin.
Right, well, in at the deep end. We've got the local transport plan, including the strategic outcomes. It's local transport plan number 4, and it's quite a lengthy read, stretching just several tens of pages, so I'm not going to read it all out, of course. But the executive summary is basically a statutory requirement of the council deriving from the Transport Act 2000, and the current plan, the local transport plan LTP3, was 2011 to 2026, which is amazingly only a year or so away. So it's to provide many improvements, including the Wokingham Greenways, enhancements to Wokingham Town Centre, the Aberfield Cross Relief Road, the North Wokingham District Road, and upgrades to railway stations and more. And that's the last one. So with a significant part of the LTP having been delivered, changing technology and government policy, a better understanding of travel habits and climate change, there's a need to refresh the strategy and address the current priorities and the needs of our communities. So the updated LTP will be an important part of the authority's goal of making Wokingham Borough a net zero carbon producer, and the draft LTP4 is attached to this report. And it's intended to be, like these documents are, a high-level document that will be supported in future by our daughter documents, which give the further detail on our approach to different elements of transport planning, such as cycling, walking, public transport and future mobility. It includes an action plan outlining policies to enable some of the key interventions that we intend to deliver throughout the plan period. In addition to this, a public consultation report and sustainability appraisal report have been completed. These form part of the executive pack and can be found at the My Journey Wokingham website. So executive approval is sought to adopt the LTP4. It will support our local priorities, including the prosperous economy, improving the quality of life of residents, reducing the environmental impacts of transport, and the first stage is in the transition of the transport sector towards lower carbon emissions and net zero. It should be noted that for the last 3 years, the DfT has intended to release detailed guidance as to the recommended content of an LTP. This is still to be released. It's perhaps not surprising. The LTP4 has therefore been developed using best practice and our best knowledge of the likely content of this guidance. WBC is aware that there will be additional guidance around carbon assessment, which will need to follow the plan once this guidance is finalised. Sorry, tongue-tied there. So I think that summary gives you a flavour of what's in this. It's very comprehensive, and I wouldn't dare to go through the whole plan.
Please don't. No, please don't. So it's a very long document.
But I'm sure that you've all read it. I've read it at some point, but I will admit to being remembering the detail for that size of document. It's not easy.
Well, I think thank you very much for that, Martin. The important point is that this has been through public consultation. That public consultation was supportive. It didn't throw up any major concerns. It's been through overview and scrutiny. I think we're ready to agree the recommendation, which is that we really recommend this in turn to council for adoption. So unless there are any questions or comments, I would suggest that this one's a relatively straightforward item and we can go straight to a vote. Those in favour, please show. That's everyone. Thank you very much. Excellent. So that deals with item 56. Item 57 is you again, Martin, and this one's electric vehicle charging strategy. Before we go to that, I should have said, of course, I hope you'll pass on our thanks to all the officers involved in the drawing up of LTP4. It's a phenomenal amount of work, and we should record our thanks to the officers.
It's been really good. It's quite impressive. I read it in various stages. Like most councillors, you see these things come through, and you just think this is a stunning amount of work, and should sort of stand us in good stead for the future.
It should, but please pass on our thanks to all the officers involved. And so we move on to item 57, which is starts on page 49 of your agenda. And again, it's over to you, Martin, to just give us a brief summary of this.
Oops, sorry, just get the page to come up. mistake. Agenda. That's why. 49.
Might help to have the hard copy.
There we are. Got it. Agenda item 57.
Just in
Is
the
a-
nick of time. Don't forget to switch on.
It's what's known in the business as a digital problem. That one. So the EV vehicle charging strategy, it's again another pretty comprehensive document, and very many thanks to the team that have produced that. Sophia has put a stunning amount of work into this, and I've seen her present this on several occasions in different forums. So the executive are being asked to consent to the adoption of the basic of the electric vehicle charging strategy. EV charging strategies are soon going to be a statutory requirement for local authorities, forming part of the local transport plans. And therefore, this strategy will form part of the suite of documents that will feed into our emerging local transport plan. As well as public transport and active travel, EVs play an important role in reducing carbon dioxide emissions from transport, improving air quality and tackling climate change. To facilitate the increased use of EVs, we must have in place a comprehensive and inclusive charge point network, one that our residents, businesses and visitors can trust and they are confident in using. The EV charging strategy sets out our vision and outlines the role of the Council in ensuring the infrastructure is put in place in readiness for the upcoming national bans on the sales of petrol and diesel vehicles. The strategy seeks to complement the growth in our private EV charge point vision and help fill any gaps left by the private market. Our aim is to provide an equitable charging network where all residents and local businesses have an equal opportunity to make the switch to an EV. So the recommendation is that the executive agrees to the Woking Borough Council adopting the electronic vehicle charging strategy, which you can all read when you're leisure.
Thank you. Well, I've had the good fortune to hear it presented by Sophia at ONS, and it is an impressive document in its thoroughness, and I would also endorse your comment about Sophia's very committed enthusiasm for this, and it really shows through. It's an excellent document. But Prue, you wanted to say something?
I do. Apart from observing that it's even better because a lot of it's funded by grant, which is even better. This is the strategy for the public charging points, as it were. We do seem to have, tangential to this, a small glitch in our own internal policy, in that we don't seem at the moment to allow people living in our council houses to install electric vehicle charging points. There seems to be some sort of policy issue, and so I'm wondering if we can just take that away and have a look and see if, I know officers already started to look at it, so we've had requests for people to be able to install them and we don't allow it at the moment. That seems a bit of a retrograde step.
Yes, I think that's something we need to look at. I mean, thinking relatively aloud, it may also be that from that comes something that could be helpful to people who want to install them at home, a standardised approach to installing these, because many private houses will have very similar configurations to our own houses, and so it may be something that we can share with the public, which will be useful to them at a later date. But we'll look into that.
As housing comes in my rather capacious remit, I think I'll also work with Martin on that and see whether we can address it, because it is, you've highlighted an important point that I think needs to be resolved. So thank you for that, Prue. If there are no other points or questions, can we move to the recommendation, which is on page 49, to agree the Wokingham Borough Council adoption of the electric vehicle charging strategy. So those in favour, please show. Again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, we move on then to the first of two reports that are going to be presented by Mark. The first one is on page 93, Economic Development Strategy. Mark, would you like to
Thank you, Stephen.
take us through this?
Yeah, first of all, Susan and George, I'd like to commend our very small but very effective economic development team, and especially our officers Karen Yeomans and Nikki Phillips. When I took on this portfolio back in June last year, we had to start on these two now cutting-edge strategies pretty much from scratch. So thank you. So here we go, item 58, our economic development strategy. Just a quick overview really. On the face of it, we're a thriving economic borough, but drilling down, our opportunity lies in the fact that we have 180,000 people, representing a massive 15% growth over 10 years. And we've got 8,500 businesses, but that represents a 6% decline over the last 5 years. And business deaths are greater than business births currently and over the same time. We've got 5,000 workless households, 3,500 unpaid carers who do 20 hours plus a week. 79% of us are in employment, but that's 6% down over the last 2 years. And also there's a markedly rising pay disparity in full-time work between men and women. So our action plan out of this strategy is to promote a growing and a greener economy for everyone. And the strategy aims to ensure the future continued economic success of the borough by tackling barriers to growth, ensuring the right conditions for growth, and by striving to make sure economic success is open to all and nobody is left out. So we've got an action plan. We're going to develop principles of inclusive growth through community wealth building. And I'll repeat that, community wealth building, by maximising productivity, increasing business innovation and competitiveness, improving skills, employability, and tackling those inequalities. And also, last but not least, enhancing place and infrastructure. So I'd like to recommend the strategy to you so we can get on with it, please.
Thank you very much, Mark, and I would really endorse your comments right at the beginning about the vital role played by our officer team in this, and particularly Karen and Nikki. Really, this is an excellent document, I think, of which we can all be proud. And one of the things you didn't directly allude to, although the language you used suggests it very strongly, this dovetails so well with our community vision work, which prioritises the importance of inclusive economic activity, everyone feeling as though they could be involved, there are no barriers to people being involved. And it also, that feeds through into the emerging council plan that we will soon be asked to, we'll be soon consulting on, and then subsequently we'll be moving to an adoption later in the year. They both incorporate these themes that are very strongly present here. So, you know, there's a nice way in which this is all fitting together in a very good architectural way. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for your role. As you said, you took this on when these were ideas but not yet much developed, and a phenomenal amount of work has been done. So very, very big thanks to you and your colleagues, officer colleagues. Is everybody happy with this? I think this looks really excellent to me. There's a wealth of information in there that's going to be immensely useful in terms of data for us to use in the future. So can we just go to the vote on this then, if nobody wants to say anything? Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Excellent. Right, we go on now to the next of your items, Mark, which is Town Centre Strategic Framework and Strategies. And this is another impressive looking piece of work. And this starts on page 187 of your agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's item 59. And as I ended, the item 58 was on enhancing place and infrastructure. So this focuses on place and infrastructure, and we're working on our town centre strategies, or our town centres strategy, whichever way you'd like to read it. And with this, we're going to include all of our towns and villages, high streets and retail hubs. And I need to reinforce that point, that this is a start. We've commenced with Woodley, Wokingham Town, and Twyford Village. It's a village, not a town. All our towns have recovered from the pandemic better than most across the nation. we've been measuring footfall via mobile phones, which show a year-on-year rise since COVID. Woodley being our shining light, 12% up on pre-COVID figures. What are Woodley doing? Unlike some parts of our country, we do not need to save our high streets, but we do need to nurture our high streets. And this strategy will help to enable town centres that helps everyone to thrive and where everyone feels they belong. Back to that community wealth building. Support businesses to create ecosystems for sustainable growth. It's tough with businesses, you know, we've got a short attention span. I run my own business. We're often accused of not putting our heads above the parapet, but if we enable businesses, they can lead. And also to celebrate the individuality of our towns. But most of all, we need to change the narrative from a struggling high street to a different town. One building on experiential, I can never say that word, activities, partnerships and strong communities. So once again, I commend this to you to approve this strategy so we can get on with it, please.
Well, thank you, Mark. And again, you know, big thanks to all the officers involved in this, Karen and Nikki in particular for their work. I'm afraid I rather landed this on your plate, Mark, because this was something I was keen that we pursue so that we could, as you rightly say, help our town and village centres to navigate really difficult waters of quite significant turbulence as a result of a big shift to online shopping, and how we can't turn the clock back, but we can help all of our town and village centres through the process of transforming themselves into something slightly different that recognises the new opportunities as well as the big challenges there. And I think this is a wonderful start. As you say, it's not the end. There's lots more to do, not least to roll it out to the other centres in the borough. But this is a great start. And when in my mind's eye, thought about how we might construct a town centre strategy, I'd never imagined it would be anything like as impressive as this. Thank you again. Thank you again for all the work. And again, there's a mass of data in there that's immensely valuable. It does, you know, it does address some concerns that are being raised quite clearly. It demonstrates that we have good town and village centres. We need to build on their strength. And as you said, we need to change the narrative a bit. We need to be talking up our town and village centres.
Just to come back to that, yeah, I mean, I said to both, well, it was Nikki at the time, that I didn't believe really, but do you know what? Now I believe. So we've come through that.
Well, I'm glad you are now a believer. That's good news. So, are there any other comments anyone wishes to make on this? I think it's another excellent document and really very pleasing to see it coming forward. So thank you very much, everyone. If you could indicate your support for the recommendation on page 188. This is approval of the adoption of the Town Centre Strategic Framework and individual town centre strategies for Wokingham Town, Woodley Town and Twyford Village Centre. Everyone's in favour? Wonderful. Thank you. Now, this is the pleasing moment when I said we've already dealt with item 60. So we move on to item 61. And this is starts on page 357. And this is the preferred operator of Matthews Green Community Centre in Wokingham. And the council has been looking for an organisation to manage the Matthews Green Community Centre for some time, and officers conducted a rigorous appraisal of expressions of interest that were submitted, drawing up a shortlist and making their final recommendations that are before us this evening. And those recommendations have come out of a process purely based on assessment by officers of the different applications as measured against the criteria. You can see on page 361 in your report. If you just want to have a quick look at those, you can see what the criteria are and how the marking played out. So, as you can see also from the report, Reading Repertory Theatre emerged from the process as the applicant best able to run the facility for community use. And that's, of course, what we were looking for, somebody who is in a good position to run this for community use. And so I don't think there's much more I need to say on that item. So I'm going to refer you to the recommendations, which are on page 357. And you can see that the recommendations are there, and they effectively put into practice what I've just been talking about. Unless there are any questions or comments, I would suggest we go straight to a vote. This is really about just noting a process that we are having reported to us, and the recommendation, and approving the recommendation. So those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Right, so we move on. And the next item on our agenda is item 62, approach to lease extensions for council shared ownership properties. And this starts on page 369 of your agenda. And that's also where the recommendation is to be found. And lease extensions on, I'm presenting this one again because it falls in my area of responsibility. Lease extensions on council-owned shared ownership properties. This will ensure compliance with legislative requirements, and particularly under new legislative requirements of the Leaseholder and Freehold Reform Act 2024, which will extend the right to extended leases to owners of houses as well as flats, where the right is currently confined. It will, from the point of view of shared ownership tenants, of course, give them much greater long-term security, which is one of the aims of our new affordable housing strategy, which seeks to ensure that all of our tenants have greater long-term security, which we believe is a great way of helping to build communities. If people feel that their future has some certainty, they're far more likely to commit themselves to involvement in a community. So I don't think I need to say much more than this. This is a report that really emphasises the legislative requirements that we have imposed upon us, but I think which we welcome for the reasons I've said. So could I ask you to support the recommendations on page 369 to allow lease extensions for council-owned shared ownership houses, ensuring consistency and alignment with forthcoming legislative changes, and to delegate authority to the Director, Place and Growth to manage the lease extension process, implementing a structured and transparent approach. Those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, everyone. Right. The next item on our agenda is back to Martin. And just before we start on this is item 63, starting on page 383. There are some part 2 papers associated with this report, and I'd be immensely grateful if no one wished to move into part 2, and no one therefore refers to any of the material in part 2. I don't want to be in the position where we have to ask Andrew to leave, which would seem a cruel and unnatural act for us to discuss in private what we already can see in front of us in the papers. So I think in the interests of Andrew and the public interest, we should be able to conduct this item without our having to refer to anything in part 2. But if anybody feels the desperate urge to talk about something in part 2, they're going to have to indicate to me, and we'll have to go through all the rigmarole of moving into part 2. But I would rather avoid that if we can possibly do so. And I have to say I see no good reason to do so. So I won't be well inclined support a suggestion we move into part 2. So Martin, would you like to lead us through this item?
Right, so the purpose of the report, basically subject quite close to my heart as well as it was to Paul's, it's to improve fair access to the bus services for residents in and around Aberfield, Finchampstead, Barkham and Wokingham. The Executive Committee are asked to consider if the bus route 3 should be enhanced to every 30 minutes using the available Section 106 money, so it's not money that we can actually use for anything else. And the sole purposes of this funding is to provide bus services in the Aberfield area. It's time-limited funding, and it's got to be spent in accordance with the legal terms of each agreement that we've achieved. So it cannot be spent anywhere else within the borough or on any other bus route either, as the funding must benefit the residents of the new homes in Aberfield. Of course, it's got a very nice spin-off, which is any investment in Service 3 will benefit anybody else who lives along the route of Service 3, which is Shinfield, Finchampstead, Barkham and Wokingham. So it does actually tick lots of very beneficial boxes for the residents in that part of the borough. And I could only say, without going much further, to recommend to the committee that they support this. And it agrees to the tender of the contract for the bus route 3 to increase the weekday and the Saturday frequency to 30 minutes between Aberfield, Finchampstead, Barkham and Wokingham Town. The contract period would be 2 years with an option to extend for 2 further 1-year periods. It agrees to the release of any appropriate Section 106 as detailed in Part 2 to support any decisions made in the Recommendation 1. It agrees to delegate the authority to award the contracts for the above bus service to the Director of Place and Growth in consultation with the Executive Member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways.
Thank you. You've summarised the recommendations very well, so I won't need to repeat them. But I will say, if I may, just one thing. This is an incredibly good news item. To really be improving the bus service in this way is really good news. It will be good news, not just, as you say, for residents in Aberfield and all of the new development in that area, but also Finchampstead, Barkham and Wokingham Town. And it does complement what we've also been able to achieve in negotiations with the new provider of the 850 bus service up in the north of the borough. So we're seeing, both in the south and the north of the borough, marked improvements in the bus service, its frequency, and it's already, certainly in the north of the borough, having a really big impact on usage. Yeah. We're finding lots of people using buses that haven't used them before. And this is exactly the kind of thing we want to encourage. We want to provide people with the opportunity to use buses if they would like to use them, and so that we can increase the range of options open to people. And of course, there are benefits to all car drivers if more people are using buses, because it reduces congestion on the roads. So this is an excellent, good news story. Thank you very much for the work on this, and please pass on our thanks to our officers for their work on this. We have some excellent officers working on our bus routes and increasing frequency of use, and we should be thankful for what they're doing. So, excellent. Thank you very much. You've read out the recommendations, so I don't need to do so. Just in case anybody wants to just check them, they're on page 383. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Excellent. Right. That really is a very considerable change that's occurred in the last year, which is this really big boost to the bus services, so that's excellent.
I don't know if I might say a couple of words to that. Yes. From my travels worldwide, one of the places I went to was Hong Kong, and 15-minute interval or less would be a lovely target to achieve in the end, because people don't even bother looking at the timetable, just like you don't look at the tube timetable, but there is one. You just turn up and go, and that really is the sweet spot, is where people don't need to use a timetable to use your service. Then ridership goes up dramatically.
Yeah, well, certainly improving frequency definitely helps. Although whether we could get it down to 15 minutes is slightly ambitious. What works within a city may be more difficult in a borough with rural areas as well as urban settlements. but it's a challenge worth
It is
trying
a
to
challenge.
rise
It
to.
is the challenge.
Now we're going to move on to a suite of reports now on finance, and they'll all be presented by Imogen, who's going to be working for her role over the next few minutes. So the first of those is on page 397, Chief Finance Officer's report. And if
Thank
you'd like
you,
to
Stephen.
start us off on that, Imogen.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously is a statutory report that is produced annually by our Chief Financial Officer, which is Graham Evers, who's over there. And it will also be repeated in our budget documentation next month. This document is an important part of the budget setting process, and is presented to all members as part of the decision making. Graham highlights concerns over the lack of assurances of the level of local government finance settlement, which is our grant funding that is given to us by central government. It has in the past been traditionally given as a consistent amount for 3 years, but recent years has only been given funding for 1 year, which makes it difficult for the council to plan its longer term funding strategy. And this year, despite being given additional responsibilities and the need to find extra funding to cover the national insurance increases, we were surprised to see that our local government grant funding went down by 1 million from last year. We still await to see what we will get from the promised national insurance grant, but it is unlikely to cover the expected 5 million extra we will have to pay in extra staff costs to cover our own staff, as well as the contractor costs that we have as well. The council needs to set a 3-year plan in the medium-term financial plan, due to be released next month. The proposed net revenue budget is expected to be approximately 183 million for the year 25 to 26, rising from 169 million in 24 to 25, which is a rise of 7.7%. The capital budget is set in a 5-year strategy, and it's set with the aims of using capital programme to improve the lives of our residents. This now predominantly includes school buildings and infrastructure, so we've narrowed it down to the things that we feel that we really need in the borough. Our budget setting process has included full consultation with Corporate and Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee throughout the autumn. This is a cross-party committee where the opportunity to ask questions about what we're doing with the budget is free and open. There should be really no surprises in the budget that will come from any councillor that comes next month. As you can see on page 402, over 70% of our revenue budget is spent on adult social care and children's services. All other areas such as grass cutting, bin collection, pothole repairs, parks and libraries and so on make up less than 30% of our funding. And it's probably important that people look at what we do in that perspective. Despite the pandemic, Brexit, inflation rises moving into next year, our finances do remain robust with the exception of a couple of areas. Many councils have significant challenges in funding the needs of special educational needs children. Currently, we are borrowing money referred to as a dedicated school grant, which is not part of the budget, but is the interest payments, which are around 5% are. The cost of providing SEND provision is rising at an alarming and unsustainable rate, and Woking Borough Council is expected to be deficit by 38.12 million by March 2025. And I think Prue will want to talk further about this, yes. It is at the point where across many councils, including Woking, it will need to take national intervention for it to remain as a sustainable concept, and it is considerable existential risk to Woking Borough Council if something is not done soon. The National Audit Office has recently reported that the current Department for Education interventions and safety valves delivering better value will not provide a sustainable system across all councils, including us. To clarify our situation, Woking Borough Council gets the lowest amount of government grants across all of Berkshire's local authorities. We get the lowest amount of settlement grant funding per head of population across all unitary authorities. Our core spending power grant has reduced by 2% or 1 million since last year, meaning we must make up the shortfall by other means. Why Woking gets so little funding is because many of these grants are based on levels of deprivation, and because we are considered to be an affluent area, it is assumed that we don't need the money, but it does not look as to what it actually costs to run these services and the services that the council needs. When council tax rises are capped at below 4.99% and the council tax bands are so rigidly fixed, we have really very little latitude to leverage the efforts that some of our residents have for the benefits of everyone. This has meant that we've had to rise to the challenge of making internal efficiencies within the council and have to look closely at how any potential projects are funded. Many of these involve difficult decisions about what work is carried out and the things that we could charge for, while balancing that with what our residents could reasonably afford. I would like to point out on page 415 that the council's expenditure has reduced by 57.4 million in real terms since 2010 to 11, thus proving the council is delivering its services far more efficiently than ever, while the average unitary authority receives a revenue support grant and retained business rates to fund around 26% of its services. Wokingham receives only 10%. Wokingham has budgeted for over 11.6 million worth of savings for the year 24-25, only slightly less than the 11.8 made last year. Since the Liberal Democrats took over from the previous Conservative administration in 2022, this council has been made, without doubt, considerably more efficient and has really been the only way to ensure that the finance of this council has remained stable. The settlement fund assessment is a calculation consisting of Wokingham's share of the business rates retained income and the revenue support grant. The retained business rates is 15.58 million. It's just over 20% of the business rates collectible. It also includes a revenue support grant from the government of 0.22 million, which is tiny. It is the calculation that shows in the Wokingham's lowest shows that Wokingham is the lowest funded of all unitary authority counties in the country, meaning that Wokingham only receives £87.38 per head, which is far less than half of Reading or Slough. Appendix 1 shows how Wokingham Borough Council compares to other comparable councils on the amount of income we get. On page 407, we have managed to receive some of the general fund balance reserves since cover some of the general fund balances reserves since COVID. This is the funding that is kept aside to cover any emergencies or unexpected spends that the council has. Before COVID, this was kept at a safe level of over 12 million, and it has dropped to a precarious level of 9 million in 2022. We have now increased it to 9.5 million during 2024 and hope to raise it to a safer level over 10 million this year. We are doing our best to lobby central government for better local government grant that is based on need rather than our level of deprivation, and both of our MPs are included in this. We are also raising significant concerns about the dedicated schools grant and the funding for SEND children. This report will be updated and presented as part of our medium-term financial plan in the budget meeting, but as an executive, we need to note what is being presented in this report and support the response letter for the local government finance settlement in Appendix 6, which I believe has your name on it, Stephen. Okay,
It does indeed have my name on it. But before I say a few words, I'm going to hand over to Prue, because you did suggest Prue might want to say something on high needs block.
Yes, I do. So if you look sort of starting page 426, 27, something like that, you've got the dedicated schools grant, which comes in these 4 blocks. It's basically money that goes via us to schools with a small top slice for our own costs, which we're committed to do. I think the place I'd really want you to look is on page 428, and there's a lovely coloured bar chart in there. It's got a sort of copyright thing next to it, which says F40. For those of you who don't know, F40 is an organisation which I think it costs us something like £300 a year to belong to, which is for local authorities who are fighting for fairer funding for education and schools. And all the orange things in that graph, in that bar chart, are the members of F40. You can see we're all clustered more or less down the bottom of the chart. Wokingham is one of the lowest funded education areas. It's really showing up in our SEND funding, and it's the SEND funding that is really the problem. Our schools, our mainstream schools, don't really get a fair whack either, but it's not as bad as our high needs block issue. And F40 has, in fact, today sent me an email with their response to the Parliamentary Select Committee about SEND funding, because I think the government knows, the new Minister, Bridget Phillipson, knows that there's an underlying problem with SEND funding. It's not adequate across the country for the demand, but the government are making noises that they will not be doing anything about it for at least a year. So we have to limp on, but the deficit will get bigger because the funding is just not sufficient. And it's not just us, it's everybody. And that's why F40 have written a very good response, in fact, to the government, pointing out the structural problems. And as Imogen said, the National Audit Office did their report, which showed that the funding was not financially sustainable. The system will fall over. At the moment, although the figures don't look great for Woking, I think Graham's written, it's not an ideal scenario. No, I think he's right, it's not an ideal scenario. But it's not a catastrophe because there's this ministerial override. I think I've referred to it before. So at the moment, that gap is not in the council book. It's not on the council's books. We're not liable for it. But that position at the moment could change in March 2026 when what's called the ministerial override could disappear. The fact that the Labour government are saying they're not going to do anything for at least a year about zone funding suggests to me that ministerial override cannot possibly disappear in March 26. If it did, all the councils would fall over immediately. And that's not an exaggeration. Almost everybody would just say we can't fund that and we'd all have to declare 114. Even we would maybe not be there on day one, but it wouldn't be long before we were in that position. So we have to hope that at some point in about a year's time we get a plan for how this is going to be properly funded. There are some indications of the direction of travel, and it's something that I think is the right thing to do and something we're trying to do anyway, which is mainstream inclusion. That children are actually, the more mainstream education, the more they can be educated with their peers, join in with everybody else, the better their life chances are, because they're integrated into society. And although there will always be children who need specialist provision, and although some parents feel that they need specialist provision because they think that will focus more on their child, sometimes it's better to try and integrate those children into mainstream. And that's why we're putting a lot of our effort into that area. So we opened 2 new units at primary schools in September. We're building more of those. And so we will still need the specialist provision. We need state specialist provision, not independent specialist provision that costs about 60-something thousand a year instead of 20-something thousand a year. But by helping that mainstream integration, that's actually also improving chances for our children. So the government have been making noises in that direction. Ofsted are making noises in their inspection, the way they're doing inspections, that they will be looking at schools to see how inclusive they are. And we won't have the situation which we've had in the past where you could get to be a really outstanding school but not be very inclusive. That's not the right way to proceed. We need inclusion, and we're very lucky in Woking that the vast majority of our schools want to be inclusive. They want to go with us on this journey to improve that. So we're going in the right direction conceptually. We're going in the right direction that we've got a safety valve programme when we're doing everything we can, and it is knocking tremendous amounts off the gap. So the gap is widening, but it's not widening as fast as it would have done otherwise. But it's not a good position to be in. And I don't want anybody to be under any illusion that it's all hunky-dory and we haven't got a problem. We have got a problem, and Graham has quite rightly drawn attention to it in this report.
Thank you very much, Prue. Just to emphasise, although so long as the ministerial override remains in place, all of this deficit is off our books. It is important to say that we have to cover the servicing charges of this deficit, the interest payments, and those are most definitely on our books, and that has an impact on us. So as this grows, even though we're not, as things stand, responsible for the whole deficit, we still have to service it.
We have to pay the interest.
Yes, that's what I meant.
And if I maybe allow a small follow-up, when we pointed that out to the DFE, they were most interested in that because nobody else had ever explained that to them.
Well,
so they've taken our report away and said that was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Well, that's a relief to know they're interested. But even the continuation of the ministerial override really is a tinkering with the problem. The problem needs a root and branch solution. And I hope that the encouraging noises we've had from government that they are seriously trying to grapple with this problem come to fruition. A couple more points, if I may. I wanted to really emphasise that Imogen is absolutely right that we have been lobbying and using our MPs to help lobby. Both of our MPs have been very helpful on this, on the important point that the government seems to be minded to emphasise deprivation as the criteria for financial assistance, even more than it currently is embedded in the system. The reason we get such a poor financial settlement from government in terms of core revenue support is because the money is allocated almost entirely on the basis of indices of deprivation in a particular council area, and we do not score highly on that. But of course, need and deprivation are not coterminous. They overlap, but they're not coterminous. So need can be generated by disability, not just by poverty. So we are trying to put this case that if the government moves to even greater emphasis on deprivation, that will have a really serious impact on us. It's had an impact this year in the sense that we've lost £1 million worth of core revenue funding. And we really do need to try and engage still further with the government to persuade them that need and deprivation are not identical, and that the true cost of delivering adults and children social care, which, as Imogen pointed out, now amount to a really substantial portion of our overall spending, the true costs of that are not reflected in the current funding formula. And that does need to change for the benefit of all those people who benefit from those services, and we would like to see benefit still more. I think that financial context that Imogen painted very well is really important. It does mean that in order to try and provide our services, we're reliant much more than almost any other council, well, in fact, much more than any other council, on what we raise locally. And that's either through fees and charges, which we were touching upon earlier in this meeting, but also principally through council tax. And again, as Imogen quite rightly pointed out, the council tax is a blunt instrument for effectively tapping the wealth that does exist. You also emphasise, Imogen, how much emphasis there's been on efficiency and securing efficiencies. One of the things that we've done in response to the financial pressures is embrace partnership working all the more warmly. And Empower, as you know, recently surveyed councils and identified us as one of the top performing ones. And that was assessing the productivity of councils by the outcomes achieved per pound spent. And we scored very highly on that. And that is an index of efficiency. And it's also an index of willingness to embrace the opportunities that partnership working provide. And finally, I'd like to echo your thanks, Imogen, to Graham for this excellent report, marked by characteristic understatement. Not ideal, I think you said. Yes, I think to put it in those terms is a great understatement, but a very good report. So thank you, Graham. Thank you, Imogen, for that presentation, and Prue for really just explaining a bit more fully the challenges with the dedicated schools grant and the high needs block in particular. So could we go to a vote on the recommendation on page 397 to note the Chief Finance Officer's report and the issues contained therein, and support the response to the Local Government Finance Act as set out in the appendix to that report. Appendix 6. Those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Excellent. So we move on to your next report, Imogen. That's item 65 on page 433. This is the shareholders' update, which is a retrospective look, I think, at what's happened, really.
It is the Q2 update, so it is quite retrospective, but yeah, it's me again, sorry. So as some of you may now realise, we require that Woking Borough Council's wholly owned housing companies to report publicly in our meetings in order to show transparency and good governance, and especially where public money is involved. These companies are Wokingham Housing Limited, Loddon Homes and Berrybrook Homes. Historically, Wokingham Housing Limited developed the new homes, while Loddon Homes and Berrybrook Homes were the landlords. Loddon Homes has approximately 170 supported tenant spaces. Berrybrook was similar, but has had the ability to operate in the private rented sector. Also mentioned in this report is Optalis, which is a rather different company which acts as the provider for our council's adult social care services, and it also operates with the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. Loddon Homes Limited is delivering services and looks after its residents, but it is operating at a loss of £26,000 at the end of the second quarter. We will need to see and wait if it recovers by the end of the year. Berrybrook is operating at a loss at £135,000 at the end of quarter two, and has already been reporting to the board that it only retains 30% of the rental income, which is not enough to cover its costs. After making representation to the council, it is likely that evidently that this will change, but there is also a possibility of a new loan arrangement to reduce their monthly payments, and we will need to see how this situation improves. But the transparency is allowing us to see what's going on with these companies, and that we've got space to do something about it before it becomes a bigger problem. There is no revenue stream for Wokingham Housing Limited, as it's no longer being used to provide development. It is costing £997,000 a year and is being covered by historical profits on schemes. The future of Wokingham Housing Limited is under review by the council, so it will not incur any more losses in the future. WBC Holdings Limited is a shareholder company with no direct business activity, but it receives an income from the subsidiaries, which is passported to Wokingham Borough Council. According to the tables in the report, it is running at a loss of £96,000 at the end of the quarter. Its main purpose seems to be to access the loans from the Public Works Loan Board, and is charged at 1% above Public Works Loan Board rates. The current arrangement of all of these is under review, and the situation is unsustainable, as costs are being incurred with not enough revenue being generated. As you can imagine, the above arrangements for these housing companies as a whole is unsustainable, and it is good that it's being dealt with before this problem gets too big. It is important that this information is now in the public realm, and we can reassure residents of Wokingham that moves are being made to rectify this situation. Optalis is our main adult social care provider and is performing very well, providing high quality care to our residents. Our new care home, Bluebell House, is still work in progress as it's being renovated, but it will soon be fully functional. As Councillor Hare, I'm sure, will tell you, staffing costs around 80 to 90% for most individual services. Recruitment and retention is good, and reducing dependency on agency staff is also a good sign. As a company, with the support from Wokingham Borough Council, it looks like Optalis are in a good position. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I'll let others speak.
I think you kind of rather encouraged David to say something, so I'm going to turn to David and see whether he wants to add something to what you've just said, Imogen.
Yes, I was just going to say, it's very true that agency staff is a big weight on the funding, and certainly in Wokingham, Optalis is reducing that quite substantially, and has just got another 20 people to come full time, which will reduce the need for agency staff. And if we can go on doing that, it gets the finances much more on a stable footing.
I think that's a point that could be applied more broadly than to Optalis, of course. We're trying to reduce dependency on agency staff where that's appropriate and possible, and it's not in all cases, of course, appropriate or possible. Thank you for that, David. I think Imogen's central point about transparency is absolutely right. The governance arrangements for the housing companies have changed recently. Elected members are no longer sit on the boards, but they are able to hold the companies to account through the shareholder committee. And I think it's the shareholder committee and the transparent presentation of all accounts that will enable, I think, improvement and to be secured and sustained. So I think this is a good good prospect for the future as a result of these governance changes. Prue.
I just wanted to say, Stephen, you made that sound as if it happened by itself. It was a set of deliberate decisions to do that. It didn't just evolve.
No, it didn't just evolve.
We decided that it wasn't good enough, that things needed to be out in the daylight, and that we needed to grasp it and sort it out, and that elected members had not always done the best things as board members, not having the right experience, and that it was better to get people in who were going to be consistent and knew what they were doing. Although I have to say I would accept yourself and myself and David and in fact David Cornish from that and Clive when he was on it. Yeah. It's a deliberate change, not a happening that's happened by accident.
No, it hasn't happened by accident, but just as Graham was beautifully understated in his report, I was trying to be understated in my comment. But
too much so, I think.
It is a process that was willed. These governance changes occurred as a result of a report commissioned, and that report, independent report commissioned, and that report made clear recommendations that this was the best way to go, and it was consistent with best practice. And we were very happy to adopt that because it reflected our experience. So with all of those comments taken on board, can we now move to the recommendation on page 433? And there are two recommendations. Housing Company's latest financial and operational position, which is Q2 of 2024-25, as reported through the shareholder committee is noted, and we also note the Optalis financial and operational position for the same quarter. Those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, everyone. We're getting there. So we're now moving to item 66, revenue monitoring, Q3 2024-25, and it's again Imogen.
Thank you, Stephen. This is really an update on our spending for this year when it comes to the revenue budget, and it shows the forecast in comparison to our medium-term financial plan for this year. We're currently projecting a small overspend of 0.7 million, which is a decrease from the 0.8 million that was projected in Q2, so we've brought that down. Council staff have worked hard within their areas to try and manage and make savings. On page 442, you can see where the council's budget stands compared to the retail price index, showing how inflationary pressures compared to the council tax increases. Adult social care is being significantly hit by rising costs and is projecting an overspend of 312,000. This is due to the increase in costs across the sector and lack of placements. Resources and assets have pressures making their targets in the contract rationalisation, but there are offsets all round due to keeping vacancies open. While not appearing in the budget, there is expected to be an in-year deficit of the dedicated schools grant of 19.6 million as demands for education and healthcare plans continues, rising 9% since the start of the financial year. Taken with the brought forward deficit of 20.2 million, there will be a predicted cumulated deficit of 38 million for March 2025. This could be viewed in Appendix D and has been already talked about this evening. The dedicated school grant continues to be a great risk to the viability of the council if there is no plan to resolve the needs of our SEND students. I think at that point, I'm going to leave it alone.
Thank you. I don't think there's much to say. I just wanted to say one little thing about the HRA. The HRA's long-term viability does depend upon our growing the HRA, increasing the amount of stock. That will be a way of helping us to balance this difficult balancing act of paying for repairs and maintenance and covering the costs of borrowing on the HRA through the receipts of the rents on HRA properties. If we can expand the HRA, we increase our revenue, and because we would be expanding it by the acquisition of new stock, we don't have the same level of liability. So that is the way forward, I think, in the long term for the HRA. I don't think there's anything more to say, unless anyone wishes to say something. I don't see anyone, so we're going to move to the recommendation on page 441, that we note the overall forecast of the current position of the general fund revenue budget, housing revenue account, and dedicated schools grant. illustrated in the executive summary and appendices attached to the report. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That is everyone. And we come to our final item on the agenda. That's item 67 on page 455, and this is capital monitoring for the same quarter. Imogen.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, you'll be pleased to know this is the last one I'm going to talk about. But essentially, I mean, looking at the report, the main things we need to talk about is obviously we need to approve 4 budget adjustments, which is an additional 500,000 for additional work needed at Bluebell House Care Home, which is our care home that we talked about earlier, which includes new windows, redecoration in the communal areas. This will also need to come from the Capital Contingency Fund, so that's how that's being paid for. The second one is an additional £36,000 for a toilet and corridor at Robert Pickett Infant School, which comes as a donation received to the council. The third item is a reduction of 187,000 due to schools being transferred to academy status and receiving their funding directly from the Department of Education, so we don't need to give it to them. The fourth item is an additional £16,000 towards Loddon Swimming Pool, which will be funded by Sport England. So these are all coming from grants or through other moves or donations.
I think that last one's 18,000.
18,000. How much did I say?
You said 16.
No, 18k is what I've got on my screen here. Towards Loddon Swimming Pool, yes. We just really need to accept these recommendations, which are quite measured.
Yep, they are indeed. And I don't think any of those approvals for budget adjustments in the capital programme should be problematic to anyone, I hope. They're all very clearly explained in the report. It's just my opportunity really to say a big thank you to all of our officers who deal with the council's finances and contribute towards the work on the council's finances. There's a team of officers who are responsible for all this excellent work, and I think we all owe them a big debt of gratitude. Without sound finances, the council can go nowhere. We can't do anything. And we have an excellent team that have worked very hard to make sure that we're in a better position to weather the storms that are hitting all councils at the moment than almost any other council I can imagine. So a big thank you, and a thank you to you as well, Imogen, for your prudent and determined management of our finances to ensure we don't commit ourselves to things we can't afford. So thank you very much, everyone, for all your work in helping us produce a good, strong financial position. So could we approve the 3 recommendations, the third of which breaks down into those 4 approvals that were asked for? All those in favour, please show. Thank you. That is unanimous. I think that brings matters to a close. There are no other items for us to consider, I believe. So thank you very much, everyone, for sticking with it. Well, thank you, Andrew, for sticking with it. I'm sure there'll be some people out there watching. But thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for attending this evening and for all of your hard work in all of your portfolios. Everyone here, whether you've had a chance to speak to a report or not, I'm very grateful for your efforts. Thank you.